Welcome, David. Here we are at PharmSci 360, the annual gathering of the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists, of which you've been a member for quite some time, as I understand.
Since day one.
Since day one. That's great. And I'm pleased to be having a conversation today with Dr. David Hauss. I'm David Otey. If you haven't seen one of my programs before, I specialize in helping technical experts tell the story of their work. And the story of this conference is what's happening with science and science communication and AI. And that will inform the conversation that we're going to have. So, David, by way of introduction, tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you here.
Thank you, David. I'm a pharmaceutical scientist by training. I'm also a registered pharmacist. My last job was having been hired to create a regulatory communications group for an emerging biotechnology company. Shortly after having joined the company, I became acquainted with the granddaddy of artificial intelligence, which is structured content authoring software. Structured content authoring software is a highly efficient way to reuse content that's been previously drafted within a submission. It can potentially reduce the drafting time to 1/3 of that does not use structured content authoring. So having recognized the opportunity that it offered, I began a crusade to try to implement this within my company. I wasn't successful, but given the introduction of generative artificial intelligence, such as ChatGPT and others, I feel vindicated that this paradigm for drafting submissions in a far more efficient, time and cost-effective manner is finally taking root. And what we are here to talk about today is what this means for scientific communications professionals, in other words, scientific and regulatory writers.
Mm-hmm. And you focus, you created a prologue video for this conference that was specifically on the use of AI in particular phases of preparing regulatory submissions, which you alluded to a moment ago. And I also want us to look at sort of the bigger picture for what it means for people going into science, whether it's pharmaceutical science or any science. I mean, generative AI has really flipped the script on a lot of things over the last couple of years. And it came about faster than you had predicted.
Absolutely. Probably about 10 years faster.
Probably about 10 years faster. Yeah, faster than a lot of us were expecting. And yet, elements of artificial intelligence, machine learning, have been around for a long time. Why don't you recap for me, for the benefit of those who haven't seen your prologue video, the central message of that as it relates to the steps in a regulatory submission that are better done by an AI tool than by a human?
Sure. To recap the essence of my presentation, I asked the question, what is the skill set of a writer, and what is the skill set of artificial intelligence, and what are the skill sets of individuals occupying writing positions within the pharmaceutical industry today? And what I found is that many individuals with the title of writer within the pharmaceutical industry do not fit my description of what a writer is. In a nutshell, a writer is an individual who can generate content de novo from raw data. The individuals most often occupying writing positions in the pharmaceutical industry are document handlers. They are not capable of generating content de novo. They rely on content generated by subject matter experts. So what do? Well, they function in an administrative capacity, which is to cut and paste this content into a highly detailed template of the document that is being drafted. So AI is actually a document handler on steroids. It can do in seconds what it would take a document handler several days to do. And it does it with greater accuracy and with far more cost efficiency.
So these document handlers you're talking about, these are typically PhDs, right? I mean, these are people with a lot of education, but not necessarily a lot of depth of experience in the subject matter.
Exactly. They're not always PhDs. They run the gamut
Oh,
of
okay.
PhD to BS, but PhDs for some reason are preferred for these roles.
Which is curious because they're as you say, they're not really creating content. The subject matter experts do that.
That's exactly correct. And typically, PhDs will walk into these positions fresh out of graduate school. They have no experience in drug development, the pharmaceutical industry, uh, and often they have very little, if any, writing experience. I mean, if you're in graduate school, you obviously need to write a thesis, but that's heavily revised and edited by your advisor and your advisory committee. If you're fortunate to have an advisor who requires it, you will have authored perhaps a couple manuscripts for publication. But beyond that, you don't have any in-depth experience of how to communicate clearly and concisely and in the format that a regulatory agency expects from a pharmaceutical company.
What the regulatory agency expects. So they're expecting something that creates a narrative that explains the data that's being submitted. Would that be accurate?
It is. What they're interested in is just the facts. They're not so much interested in your opinion or your interpretation, and they're getting away from that. Now, there is some interpretive text included, but you really have to stick to the facts. You can't deviate much from what the data tells you. So the FDA wants just the facts, the top line summary of what you found in the studies that you are using to justify that your drug is safe enough to test in man for the first time.
Okay. Okay. That it's safe enough. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so for someone starting out in a career in science who needs to be aware that so that they're not blindsided by disruptive change, which is really what this is about. What advice do you give?
The advice I would give to anybody who is confronting any type of disruptive change is to first do some soul searching. Uh, find out what value that you can contribute that a machine cannot, or a computer in this case cannot. You've got to ask yourself that hard question. And if you come up snake eyes and there is no answer, then you better figure out how you can contribute value that the machine that's about to replace you cannot. Uh,
Yeah, how do you add value?
right. How do you add value?
So, when you talk about adding value, um, I had given a talk earlier here at this conference regarding, what it is that's uniquely human in the scientific process, and it seems like using one's imagination and getting excited about a new avenue for research is a uniquely human trait, and building the kinds of relationships that lead to successful collaborations is another uniquely human trait. So when you think about the work you've done specifically in science communication, in writing, uh, which is your sweet spot, it's what you care about a great deal, obviously. Um, let's talk a little bit more about the uniquely human aspect of that. What is it that the humans are going to bring, whether it's to a regulatory submission or some other science communication, that we can be reasonably sure, based on current trends, is not going to be replaced by a machine?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head about being excited, excuse me, about the work you do. You have to be passionate to be an effective writer. You have to have a passion for making somebody understand something that they might not even have heard about. And there's a satisfaction when you see someone's eyes light up and go, wow, I understand now. Thank you so much.
There is, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a tremendous satisfaction that comes from that. And to enable you to put in the hard work, to enable you to communicate that message, you have to be passionate about it. You need to push yourself to new limits. You want to be perfect. You want to reach that other individual.
Sure, sure. If you want to reach that other individual, it takes a passion for what you're doing. Yeah. Um, so when we think about some of the things you've mentioned, I want to circle back to a little bit just to make sure they're clear. You talked about, and I'm sorry I've lost the phrase, the structured
Structured content authoring.
Structured content authoring.
Right.
Go back to that for a moment. That was around before
Correct.
the generative AI models that we're using now.
Yes. Structured content authoring is a very efficient software platform for reusing content. Now, the first applications were found with companies that manufacture equipment, complicated equipment that requires a user manual. Think
Okay.
a pilot's manual for a 787. That's an incredibly complicated document. It needs to be very accurate. And these documents are frequently updated as well as they learn problems with the plane or new ways to use it, safer ways to use it. These documents have to be updated. And if content is reused within that document, you have to make sure that you update it every place that it's used.
Oh,
Okay.
every place that it's used, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the benefits of SCA is it keeps a computer memory of all the instances where this content was used, and it automatically updates it. So you don't have an inconsistent document telling a pilot to turn the flaps one way and another part telling him to turn the rudder the other direction and putting the plane into the ground.
Yeah.
So simply...
You know, I'm not a pilot, but I'm a frequent passenger.
Okay, yes, right.
And what you made me think of is
Right.
the safety video that I
Right.
saw on the seat back monitor
Sure.
of one of the planes I was on recently, where they went through all the ordinary stuff about your seat belt and tray tables and the whole bit. And when they got to the part about how many exits there are from this plane, you could tell that's where they had to go to the one that was specific to that model, because it's going to be different for a 319 than it is for a 320. And it just, what you were saying made me think, they've got this whole, what we used to call, when I was working in television, a donut. Everything that's wrapped around it is the same, but you've got to plug in the right thing here to make the video for that plane. And it almost sounds like that's the kind of thing you're talking about. You've got to have the right information to plug in at the right place. And if that's ever changed, you've got to know all the places where that was plugged in so it gets changed there too.
Correct. And with a regulatory submission, up to 66% of the content in any given regulatory submission is reused. So more is reused than generated de novo. So that
Okay.
becomes particularly critical if you make a revision in one part of the submission, that you get it right in all of the other places that use that text.
Yeah, I can see why that's really a job for a computer.
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't make mistakes.
They're not,
They don't get tired.
They can search text
Right.
strings, and
Sure.
they don't make mistakes with things like that. And yet the other parts of the process, you were talking about the writing and having a passion for it. You also, something else you had mentioned to me previously was about the process of prompt engineering. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Prompt engineering is the ability to interrogate a generative AI model in an appropriate manner to generate the type of text that you want. So this is how I see the direction of the writer moving when AI starts to become applied for generating documents. And to be a prompt engineer, you have to understand the content, both breadth and depth of understanding, because if you don't, you won't know what question to ask the generative AI model to get coherent text out of it that addresses the audience that you're trying to teach.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage in, garbage out,
You've
absolutely.
got to ask the right questions.
Correct.
And I think in a way that's nothing new. I've often thought that in any discussion, the person who's making the most valuable contribution
Right.
isn't the person with all the answers. It's the person who's making sure you ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to ask the right questions of your AI tools as well.
Absolutely.
And so the people who are going to be good at prompt engineering are people with a great, as you say, breadth and depth of knowledge
Correct.
in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to me, isn't it also true that they would have to have some kind of understanding about how those models work? Or is that, are they too transparent for that?
I guess the science behind how a generative AI model works would be not necessary for a prompt engineer, and
Okay.
would probably be above their level of understanding. It's an elaborate statistical model that predicts what word should follow another, I mean,
Okay.
that's my high-level understanding of
Okay.
it.
All right.
But they wouldn't really need to know the nuts and bolts of how these things function. They would just
Well,
need,
when it comes to the nuts and
yeah.
bolts, one of the comments that I hear sometimes is, or questions I should say, is how do you make sure that what you're getting back from a generative AI tool is accurate? Because they're harvesting a lot of information, and the tool itself doesn't have a way of knowing what of its training information is truly reliable.
There are two ways you can do it. First is having a human subject matter expert screen that content to make sure it makes sense. Now, with regard to data and numbers, there's a tool called uh, retrieval augmented generation, and this is a
Retrieval augmented generation. Okay.
correct. This is a function of structured content authoring platforms, and what it does is it understands what generative AI is trying to draft, and what it presents it with is material most germane to the document that GAI is drafting. So it narrows the search to information which is most relevant. That way
Okay.
you screen out a lot of potentially erroneous information.
So it's narrowing the search to that which is most relevant, which you hope will also be that which is most accurate.
Correct. Well, structured content authoring only maintains accurate
Oh,
information
that's
in
right.
its
Because it's already been
repository.
fed into the
Correct.
system.
Right.
Yeah.
It's been drafted by humans.
It hasn't
and
been found in the wild.
correct. No, it has not been found in the wild.
Okay.
It's controlled environment, and it's selected from a controlled environment.
And selected from a controlled environment. Well, that makes me feel a little safer about it.
Right.
Yeah. Um, another of the questions that we've been hearing has to do with attribution. If one is going to be using these AI tools
Mhm.
as part of the process of drafting a regulatory submission, what is the appropriate way to identify the role of AI in that final result, the final output?
In other words, should you disclose that AI was
Disclosure,
used?
right.
I would say yes, absolutely.
Mm.
We did use AI for this, and of course, it was checked by a human. In the case of regulatory submission, that would be a must.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
okay. Because there's not really a downside to disclosing, as far as I
yeah,
can see.
not at all. It's a tool. So
Yeah.
I used a tool. Okay, that's fine.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say I used X brand of word processor, but to say that yes, there was a generative AI tool that had a part in assembling this information seems like a reasonable thing to do, to
Well,
say.
you know, with regard to regulatory submissions, it may be necessary. In fact, I think it probably would be necessary to disclose the tool that you use, because those tools have to be validated for accuracy. The FDA is not going to allow you to use a tool that has not been validated, and that is a way of limiting or eliminating the potential for erroneous data.
Okay, all
So,
right.
yeah.
Are there some tools that are going to be better suited for that validation than others that you're aware of?
Any tool that's going to be applied by the life science industries, particularly the
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical industry, would have to pass that scrutiny.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, in general, as we zoom out a little bit and we think about anyone going into science and the disruptive technologies that we're encountering right now,
Right.
I mean, you've encountered disruptive technologies in your career already.
I've championed one. Yeah.
You,
Well,
you,
this is the second, perhaps.
okay. Well, let's go back to that first one.
Right.
That came about because of was it the book you were writing?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that process and how it would be different today.
Uh, the process isn't really different. It was technical. It was related to formulation development, but about 70% of all small molecule new chemical entities that could potentially become drug substances were poorly water soluble. That being said, after oral administration, if the drug can't dissolve in water, it's not going to be very well absorbed because the bulk of the contents of the GI tract are water. We found that many of these compounds had very high solubility in oils or lipids, for instance. And it didn't matter what the drug was dissolved in. If it was a lipid or if it was water, it would still be absorbed. The important thing that it was dissolved in a lipid that enabled the body to absorb the drug. This improved the absorption by hundreds of percent, 11-fold improvement in absorption, for instance, using a lipid.
So that was a game changer.
It could have been a game changer. Now, I understand that lipid-based formulations have increased in prominence in formulating drugs, but it didn't catch fire as we thought and hoped it would have. This was due to the fact that pharmaceutical companies like to make compressed tablets. Lipids typically had to go into a soft gelatin or a hard gelatin capsule. The process was far slower. It was fraught with other problems. And in addition, lipids have stability problems of their own that can degrade the drug. So development of formulation was more complicated. And the pharmaceutical company was, well, we don't care if we only have 1% of absorption of the drug. It still works, and we can make a bigger profit as opposed to using this more complex technology, and we can get a faster return on investment. So it was a business decision.
A business decision.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And not being a pharmaceutical scientist myself, I actually understood that. So I congratulate you
Sure.
on your ability to make those concepts understandable.
Sure.
I mean, at least I do know what a lipid is.
Right.
An oil or fat type
Sure.
of substance.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. You've obviously got some skill at making technical topics understandable to people that don't have your level of technical expertise.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some base level of scientific knowledge. And that's a skill that's still, I think, can we say it's uniquely human?
Absolutely. Because I have to understand you, I have to understand your level of understanding, and then I have to communicate it to you in a way that you can understand. Now, if you were a scientific professional from a different discipline, I would approach it in a different manner, but there would be certain things that I would have to educate that individual quickly to enable them to understand the message that I wanted them to understand.
Mm-hmm. So you have to, I heard you say, you have to understand my level of understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Very, which comes down to some extent, a measure of one's emotional intelligence, your ability to use empathy to understand where someone's coming from.
It's a poignant observation and a very good point, because I've found that the most accomplished individuals in the scientific community are the most humble. They are happy to talk at any level they need to make somebody understand something. I've encountered a number of individuals who are just the opposite. They're extremely arrogant, and if you don't understand what we're saying, well, you're stupid, and we're not going to even
That's
try.
on you.
It's very distressing, but there are those types of individuals out there. You're one of us or you're not. It's an exclusive club, so it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, you're making me feel comfortable that you're not excluding me from your club. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, how do we sum this up, David? We've covered a lot of ground here about the use of these tools and what these mean for people's career choices and opportunities. How would you sum up this discussion that we just had?
Well, artificial intelligence is going to happen whether we like it or not. It's coming, and it's going to cause transformational changes across the entire career landscape for just about every profession out there. Again, the goal is to do some soul searching and determine what value you can add above and beyond this artificial intelligence paradigm that could potentially replace you. If you don't have anything you can add, then you have to get up to speed and raise the bar in getting additional education, experience, or whatever, so you can use that tool to help you as opposed to having that tool replace you.
As opposed to having it replace you. Yes.
Right.
I've heard it said that AI will not take your job, but someone using AI probably will if you don't use it.
That's very well put. That's absolutely correct, because the someone using the AI was formerly using you to do lower level work. And if a machine can now do it and faster and cheaper, well, sorry.
And without taking vacation.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you for this opportunity to have this fascinating discussion. I feel like I'm learning more all the time about a science that I'm not trained in, and yet thanks to the generosity of the kinds of people you mentioned, of which I believe you're one, who are willing to talk at whatever level is appropriate, I feel like I'm coming away knowing more about the subject than I did before. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for the compliment, and also thank you for the opportunity to get the message out there. Because I think a lot of people need to hear what we both have to offer. There's a lot of concern and anxiety out there, and it doesn't need to be.
Doesn't need to be.
Right.
And thank you to the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists for making it possible for us to be here and have this conversation.